Hey everyone, Sam here, otherwise known as FPL Pricey. In today's video, I'll be running through my transfer plans ahead of Game Week 37, the penultimate game week of the FPL season. Right then, so to get us started, let's have a look at how my team is set up ahead of Game Week 37 at the moment without any transfers made. One free transfer to use, like many of you out there, and 1.9 million in the bank, so a little bit of money to play with. My transfer last week ended up being not what I expected it to be, but I was open to it because we knew we would probably get some sort of Man City early team news. So I did have plans in place for if we heard different combinations of players were starting or not starting. As it happens, Marmoush was leaked to be benched. So instead of taking out Mateta for Wissa, I took out Marmoush for Wissa. It didn't really make much difference either way. Both players blanked. Obviously, Marmoush came on for 5 minutes at the end and actually nearly scored. So it could have been horrific. But 1 point from Marmoush. Obviously, Wissa also only getting 1 point. So no benefit there. But some serious points dodging going on in Game Week 36 from my team. And that's felt like the theme over the last few game weeks as well, especially Crystal Palace and Man City. Crystal Palace, specifically in Game Week 36, I cannot believe that I didn't get more points out of Sarr or Mateta. The amount of chances that they had in the first half, obviously they had the goal ruled out for offside for Sarr with a Munoz assist as well. And then, of course, the one majorly owned player that I didn't have, Eze, goes and scores a brace. So very frustrating. Sarr put up good data. Mateta had a few good chances. Munoz admittedly did very well. But we have to now take that into consideration going into Game Week 37, especially because it looks likely that there'll be minutes risks going into that game week with the FA Cup final before we go into Game Week 37 for those players specifically. Same for Man City. But Gvardiol doesn't feel like quite as much of a risk as the likes of Sarr or Mateta. I think there's a very good chance that one of those two players gets rested after their FA Cup final. And the problem is we don't know which players are going to come off injured, which players are going to play the most minutes in the FA Cup final. So it's really hard to predict which of these players are going to be safe and secure for Game Week 37, which happens in the midweek after the FA Cup final. So Mateta and Sarr are going to be two key themes on the transfers out this game week. Mateta probably more prominently because he's been getting very shaky minutes, and the data across the last few game weeks, in fact, all the way back to around game week 30, has not looked that convincing either. And there are quite a few strikers I like the look of for the last couple of game weeks. So I think he's probably a sell. Sarr, I'd quite like to hold on to on the chance that he does start against Wolves because the data he's putting up is very, very good still. He's just been flirting with points and dodging them massively in the last few game weeks. And I do still feel like there's one last haul coming for him. But if he's a minutes risk going into Game Week 37, then there are players that I have my eye on which might be okay to move to for the last couple of game weeks. Elsewhere, I've already mentioned Gvardiol. I think if there's any Man City rotation, it is likely to come in Game Week 37. Gvardiol feels like one of the most secure picks in that Man City lineup, but of course, we don't know how the FA Cup final is going to play out. So even he is a marginal risk. And obviously, there are different systems that City could play, and he could potentially get rested. I think the chance of that happening is fairly low, though. So I'm probably going to move over that. With Marmoush, KDB, Haaland, at the moment, and by the time you lock in your teams, all three of which are going to be relatively risky going into Game Week 37. But I think in all three cases, given that we won't know any better at the moment, I think all three of them are probably a hold for now. I wouldn't be buying any of them, but if you've got them already, I'd probably risk starting them because I think Marmoush is likely to start the next game if he's fit. Haaland, again, is fairly likely to. Same with KDB for his last home game for Man City. All three have risk attached, but I think given we're not going to have that information, it's not worth a transfer, and it's certainly not a -4 worthy transfer to get rid of them going into Game Week 37. Looking at the rest of my team at the moment, not too many other parts that need moving, luckily. If you look at my goalkeeper, Raya against Newcastle at home is not ideal, and Verbruggen at home to Liverpool is no better. I think I'm going to hedge my bets again like I did last week with Arsenal just going for one defender there. So Raya in goal against Newcastle, benching Saliba. I do think Newcastle score, but Arsenal's defensive data is consistently very good. So it wouldn't be crazy if Newcastle had an off day and Raya was able to keep a clean sheet. So I think I'm probably going to just stick with him. It's not worth a transfer for me. And especially because there's at least one other move I'm going to make, it's definitely not worth a -4. So it's just going to be a bit of a hope in goal that I get a couple of save points, but I'm not expecting much there. In the defense, I'm hoping not to use a transfer on my defenders between now and the end of the season. Munoz, I think of the Palace players I've got, is the most likely one to be fine for game week 37. Still a minor risk, but considering his attacking upside and the fact it's a good home fixture for Palace, I do want to start him if at all possible. And I think he's a lower risk of getting benched, considering they don't have many alternatives in that position. Gvardiol and Milenkovic, I think, are fine to complete my backline. Milenkovic away at West Ham, and of course I've got Bowen at home to Nottingham Forest, so they go up against each other, is not ideal. But in neither case is it worth a transfer for me. Obviously, we try to avoid those matchups where possible because it limits upside. But one matchup where they're going up against each other isn't the end of the world. And Milenkovic does have some set-piece threat as well. So there is the chance that he could get a goal from a corner or something like that. And I'm due a bit of luck as well. So hopefully something like that can come in for me. Into the midfield, I've got 3 that are a bit more secure. And Mbeumo, Salah and Bowen are probably not going anywhere. Although there is one move I can make for Salah, which I don't hate, which we'll come on to in a moment's time. And Mbeumo and Bowen are definitely going nowhere, both with decent home games this week. Forest, a few weeks back, probably would have been a fixture I'd try to actively avoid, but their defensive data has dropped off, so I don't mind playing Bowen at home to Forest in, again, their final home game of the season. And then Bowen next week plays Ipswich anyway, so he's definitely not a sell for me. And Mbeumo, similar, not bad couple of fixtures. Fulham at home is looking like quite a healthy fixture now. Fulham have dropped off. Brentford are winning games for fun at the moment and are on a bit of a European charge. And Mbeumo's data hasn't been exceptional, but he's still getting 90 minutes. He's still on penalties, still on set pieces. So very happy to own him. Salah, there's definitely an argument that Liverpool are on the beach because looking at social media, quite a few of them are literally on a beach, but there are still going to be moments where they can open up teams, they can score chances. And Salah, let's not forget, he doesn't drink, he won't be partying. He will be probably in the gym right now and training hard. So it's just whether or not the team around him is strong enough and focused enough to be getting him the chances to score goals. The fixtures are fine, Brighton and Crystal Palace for the last 2. I think he's probably a hold unless you want to go really aggressive on the transfer. Bring in someone like a Palmer this week, then maybe move on to a Saka the following week. Possibly captaining both times because they both are expected high points totals for the next 2 game weeks. But of course, you are going against a very highly owned Salah. Even though he's not been in great form recently, he could still punish you in any given game week. And he's got a good history against Brighton and a good history against Crystal Palace. Let's face it, who doesn't he have a good history against? And Liverpool aren't just going to be on the beach forever. I'd imagine they'll put in at least one statement performance before the end of the season. They weren't horrendous at all against Arsenal either, let's not forget. A few of them have been off partying, but they're still going to be training. They are professionals at the end of the day. And Salah, again, is about as professional as they come. So I don't think he's a must sell by any means. But he is a position where if you feel like you can gain an advantage if you're chasing, I don't mind it as an aggressive play, which again, I am chasing, so I'll come on to that in a moment. Up front, we've already talked about Mateta a little bit. He, for me, is almost certainly a sell this week, even though he doesn't have a bad fixture. The minutes doubt is 100% there now. Nketiah is waiting to come in and get minutes as well. And given they played the FA Cup final a couple of days before, I think there's a high chance that he either comes off early or maybe gets benched. So for me, it's too many factors going against him. I doubt he even takes the next penalty for Palace because Eze took the last one and scored. So Mateta for me is probably the player that I'm going to sell. I'll come on to replacements in a moment's time. Wissa, again, I like that home fixture against Fulham. He was frustrating against Ipswich, but 0.54 XG in that game. I think he was a bit unfortunate, and he's definitely a player that I'll hold on to now for the rest of the season, most likely, and definitely for this game week. Isak is a player that, again, a bit like Salah, if you were feeling aggressive and you wanted to chase, his ownership is very high, so you could have a bit of a play against him and transfer him out. Against Arsenal away from home is not an easy fixture, of course, but if anyone's going to score for Newcastle, it would be Isak. And then next up is Everton at home for the final game of the season at St James's Park. They have about as much to play for as any team right now, and they are gunning for second place. If they beat Arsenal, they will be in prime position for second place. So I think Isak and any Newcastle asset is probably not as bad an option as it looks like on paper for this fixture. So I think for me, I'm going to hold on to him and have him for Everton at home in game week 38 personally. On the bench, won't really go over it too much. Verbruggen, Murphy, Saliba and Livramento, none of them with great fixtures. Happy enough to bench all of them. If Murphy has to come on for one of my front seven because one of them are mysteriously injured or get rotated, it's not the end of the world and it's certainly not worth a hit. So let's look at what my actual transfer plans are now that we've kind of diagnosed where the problems are in my team. Right then, so let's take a look at some of the different transfer combinations I can look at ahead of game week 37. Last couple of weeks, and I am chasing, so there's definite Hail Mary punts that I could put in here that probably won't make a lot of sense for many people, but if you're also chasing rank, then maybe some of these will be options that you chime with and you could get on board with. Maybe not in regular season where we're playing a bit more conservatively and we need these players for loads and loads of weeks, but because there are only 2 game weeks left, there are a few punts out there that you might want to take, and maybe that can give you the edge over some people that you're chasing in mini leagues, or if you're chasing rank as well, then it's equally valid. For me, the first and most obvious transfer would be to remove Mateta. There's going to be those question marks over expected minutes for a lot of the Palace players, but Mateta seems like the most likely one to get rotated, given that his minutes have been very shaky in the league recently. If we look here, 59 against Spurs, 75 before that, 10, 74, 55, 45. He hasn't played 90 in a very long time. In fact, since the injury. And it's just not consistent enough for me. The data's not been great either. Obviously, a good XG against Spurs, but a player getting 60 minutes or thereabouts each week is nowhere near as effective as someone getting consistently 80 to 90. And he will be a doubt going into game week 37. So for me, I think he is the most logical transfer out. Looking at the forward options on my watch list right now, if you can just see them at the bottom right of the screen, Watkins is top for me. I do have the money to bring him in, and there are going to be a lot of people talking about buying Watkins. He is only 20% selected as far as the FPL player base is concerned, and probably even less than that in the higher ranks. But by the time we get to the deadline, I imagine he'll be something like 40 to 50% effective ownership. That is still fairly differential for me. And if I look at captaining him, which against Spurs at home is certainly an option, then that gives me a proper edge over people around my rank, because again, if he's only 40% effective ownership, I would then get 160% of the points he gets against Spurs, and then a Man United away after that. It's a good couple of fixtures, and his minutes are looking more secure than they have been during the majority of the season. Obviously, to begin with, he was competing with John Duran. He left, and then Rashford came in, and then he was competing with Marcus Rashford, who is now injured. So Watkins looks fairly secure. He's just broken the Aston Villa all-time Premier League goal scorer record. He'll want to add to that before the end of the season. And Spurs, who will have one eye on their Europa League final the following midweek, might rotate, or even if they don't rotate necessarily, which I think is probably more likely, they'll still maybe not be pushing that extra yard, maybe not doubling down on the sprints, maybe not competing quite as heavily as they would have in any other regular week. None of them want to get injured. They'll have a massive eye on their final the following midweek. So I just wonder if there's an advantage to be gained there for Aston Villa. And let's face it, a full strength Villa, which it will be, versus a full strength Spurs, who are even going full steam ahead at the fixture, you'd still favour Aston Villa, and the chances they create against a very leaky Spurs side, you'd imagine there's going to be quite a lot of them. So Watkins makes a lot of sense, is going to be my likely transfer in. However, there are a few other options that if you want to go very differential, you can look at instead. Beto, Vardy and Delap, all very cheap options, all sub 6 million. So you can get to them pretty much from any starting striker at this point. I'll start with Delap because he's my least favourite now. And actually, a few game weeks ago, I probably would have had him top given the fixtures. Leicester followed by West Ham. That's a good couple of fixtures to go out on for Ipswich and for Delap. And he'll probably be trying to put himself in the shop window for a summer move. He's got that release clause, which is now active. And I think there are going to be a number of Premier League clubs eyeing him up as a potential transfer over the summer. That might give him that extra motivation to just give that little bit more effort in the last couple of game weeks. Two good fixtures that you'd expect Ipswich to at least be competing in. And if Delap was getting the minutes, he would be a player that I really like the look of at just 3.1% ownership. However, the minutes have put me off a little bit. 19, 8, and then 70, 67, 61. He's not getting anywhere near 90. And for me, that's enough to put me off, considering there are other players around his price point who are getting better minutes and, frankly, better data as well. Vardy's the next one on the list. He has been getting better minutes, 90, 84, 90, a couple of returns in that time as well. And he's one goal away from 200 for Leicester. So I think with Vardy, there's a bit of romance there. He's at a good price. He's on penalties and he's getting good minutes. With Ipswich at home in game week 37, I wouldn't put it past him to get that 200th goal in game week 37. And then I probably wouldn't hold on to him for game week 38 if I was to bring him in. That would probably become an Evan Nilsson who, again, he's on my watch list. Terrible fixture this week, or well, maybe not terrible. That might be exaggerating, but not a great fixture this week away at Man City. But then obviously Leicester at home is a fantastic fixture for him. So maybe if you've got the transfers or you want to go aggressive, it could be someone like a Vardy and then transfer across to Evan Nilsson next week. The same could be said for Beto, their final home game at Goodison Park, and he's not been bad since Moyes came in. Southampton at home, another very good fixture. Good price point at 4.8 million, and he scored in his last two. So again, another player, cheap, easy to get to. And if you're going very aggressive on the fixture, I really don't dislike it. In fact, I'm ever so slightly tempted to, instead of Watkins, go straight to Beto and then maybe give myself a little bit more wiggle room to play with a second transfer and possibly go aggressive on that instead. But if I did go for Beto, I'd have 4.6 million in the bank to play with. Now, that would be more tempting as a move if I wanted to go really aggressive and I had the money to maybe get rid of Sarr and go hyper aggressive and get a second premium in midfield, someone like a Palmer or a Saka ahead of next game week. Unfortunately, I'm just a little bit shy on money to do that. I could remove Bowen or Mbermo or Salah, of course. I could do that anyway. But I don't think Mbermo or Bowen as transfers out this week make a lot of sense for me. So although Beto is tempting, I would have to prefer him over Watkins objectively because the money that I save doesn't actually go to much use for me this game week because I'm looking at holding on to probably Mbermo and Bowen anyway, and I can't upgrade Sarr to the player I'd want to, i.e. Palmer, this game week. So unfortunately, that probably leaves me back where I started, where it's Mateta to Watkins as the most likely move. And then I've got a conversation around whether or not I want to go aggressive by making a midfield transfer. And that would be for a -4 as well. So it's probably not advisable to do that at this point in the season. Most -4s won't pay off now because we've got a very limited time frame for it to pay off in. But there are options out there I do like the look of. And if I've got a bit of hesitation over Sarr's minutes, and I don't think he gets good minutes in game week 37, which is definitely a risk, I could look at going aggressive with a -4 and doubling up on Aston Villa attack, bringing in Morgan Rogers, which might be seen as a bit of a defensive play because his ownership is fairly high, but that Spurs fixture is very good. He won't be over 100% effective ownership, and if I think Sarr is benched, I think there's a good chance that Rogers does beat him by 4 points. And then I'd probably look at moving him on in game week 38 to someone like a Cliver or a Semenyo. The other players I could look at in that position are going straight to Semenyo or Cliver because I do have the money to do so. However, in both scenarios, we've seen that it's Man City away from home. I'm not loving it. And I think in that scenario, I'd probably just take the gamble on Sarr starting. A couple of other outside punts that we could look at in game week 37 itself is remove Sarr for someone like a Neto, who I think will be playing up front against Man United at home with Jackson obviously suspended for game week 37, and that is a very good looking fixture. His data's not been terrible this season, 0.32, nothing too exceptional, but if he's playing out of position up front, then I think that could be a nice little differential. The same could potentially be said for El Canous or for Enciso. As we've said already, they've got good fixtures up against each other this game week. El Canous has been actually very good for Leicester, obviously in a struggling team, so he's not going to be putting up fantastic data, only 6 returns this season, but 2 of them have come in the most recent 2 game weeks. And Ipswich is a team that you'd expect a pretty good level of competition between the two sides. So if El Canous, you'd expect him to perform well in the Championship next season. If he stays at Leicester, then there's a decent chance he'd do so against Ipswich this week as well. The same could be said for Enciso as well, as another differential punt that I don't mind the look of. At the time of recording, I think it's most likely that I stick to just one free transfer, looking at Watkins in. But like I said, I could look at using that -4 to remove Sarr for someone like a Rodgers, most likely. The other final thing I could, of course, look at as a bit more of an aggressive play, as I mentioned earlier, is to take a chance against Liverpool and against Salah and use that money to go straight to Palmer this week for a -4, followed by Saka the following week and captain them both times. Now, Palmer is coming out on top of a lot of the data-led algorithms that fuel FPL these days. So if you're a data-led manager, then Palmer might be a very interesting play, especially if you do think that Salah is going to drop off, not through any fault of his own necessarily, but more the team around him maybe just dropping down a couple of levels. If they are in party mode, it's a definite chance it could happen. So with Palmer in mind, it would be aggressive. For a -4, I don't think it pays off, but if I captain him, again, it's going to be a low effective ownership play. And if I go for both Watkins and Palmer, I think that covers me off of two of my favourite options in Game Week 37. Palmer would then also become Saka in Game Week 38. And if I stick with Salah this game week, I think it's unlikely that I then go from Salah to Saka in Game Week 38. So it would at least open up that route to me, because I wouldn't want Palmer quite as much in Game Week 38. Of course, it's not the worst fixture in the world away at Nottingham Forest, but I'd prefer Saka against Southampton. Whereas if I kept hold of Salah, then his home game against Crystal Palace is one that I'd have a lot more hesitation in selling for Saka, because we know what Salah can do at home, final home game of the season at Anfield. It's going to be pretty hard to sell him that game week. So if I was to sell him, I think this week would make more sense than next. And it would set me on a bit of a path to go from Palmer to Saka, probably for hits both times. So I don't think it pays off, but it's an aggressive play that I don't hate the look of. Anyway, as we finish today's video, do let me know what you think of my transfer plans, which route you would take, whether I should just go conservative, bring in Watkins perhaps for Mateta and leave it there, or whether a more aggressive play, maybe removing Sarr for someone like a Rodgers, or a Salah for someone like a Palmer, and then maybe captaining Palmer followed by Saka the next week, is more of an interesting play considering my rank and where I'm at the moment. As we reach the end of today's video, if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel, that'd be greatly appreciated. Let me know your questions in the comments below, and I'll try and get back to you before we get to the Game Week 37 deadline. And I'll see you in a couple of days as we lock in my team selection ahead of Game Week 37.